Don't you hate clients who send you a 200-page tender package full of useless information and give you 5 days to price? It sucks. So why do you do the same to your own subcontractors? The only way to accurately estimate subcontractor costs on a construction project is to get accurate quotes from your subcontractors. While this doesn't sound like rocket science, the key is to spoon feed them the information they need and make it as easy as possible for them to quote your project accurately. Basically, you can't treat them like your clients probably treat you. In this video, I'm going to give you a complete system to accurately estimating subcontractor costs and including them in your tender submissions. I'll also give you some very effective strategies I've seen over the years at large construction companies they use to de-risk their procurement. Because unlike labor, plant, material, and other cost items, subcontractor costs are as much, if not more, about contract management and administration than they are about estimating. So the first thing I want to start with is a quote a subcontractor sends you is not an estimate. They are fundamentally different. Yes, to accurately estimate subcontractor costs, you do need subcontractor quotes, but if all you're doing is plugging your subcontractor quotes into your estimates, you are leaving yourself very exposed. At the end of the day, we're estimating what it will cost us to subcontract the work, not just the subcontractor quote. This means we have to include things like scope gaps, exclusions, variations, delay, default risk. What happens if your subcontractor goes broke? Our job is to determine the true allowance needed in our bid. This is fundamentally much more difficult than taking a quote and plugging it into a spreadsheet. We have to deal with procurement, how to get value for money from the supply chain, then how to properly assess and level bids, and then select what price to include in our estimate. Because at the end of the day, we are ultimately responsible for the performance of our subcontractors, so we need to budget for the true cost of them completing the work. Step 1 in this process starts with building the correct subcontractor package list. The goal in this first step is to take the overall project scope and break it down into component, logical, ready-made packages. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, here is an example project work breakdown structure or a procurement package list. This is done in my estimating software Operum, and you can see we've taken a commercial construction project, we've broken it down into some preliminary packages, and also all of our construction packages such as earthworks, concrete works, structural steel, mechanical services, fit out, and so on. So basically, we've taken the project scope and we've worked out a list of packages we need to procure from the market. This is the most important decision that will have the greatest impact on your project costs during the estimating process, particularly if you're a general contractor that subcontracts out the majority of the work. The way you structure and manage your packages is the biggest determinant of the cost of managing those packages. We want to do it in a way that maximizes and leverages market competition, but doesn't leave us having to manage 1,000 tiny different packages and run into a whole lot of coordination issues during construction. So there's a real art to doing this effectively. I think what we in general should be striving for in a competitive market is we don't want margin on margin. So we don't want our subcontractors to subcontract our work. Now, there's obviously going to be exceptions to this rule. For example, if we're procuring an earthworks package and the subcontractor subcontracts out their compaction test. It's a tiny portion of the work. We don't want to deal with the hassle of having to free issue and coordinate compaction tests with them. But in general, we shouldn't have our subcontractors subcontracting out major packages of works, because then we're just paying for margin on margin. When we create this package list, the goal should be to have these packages comprehensive and mutually exclusive. There shouldn't be overlapping scope and there shouldn't be missing scope. Missing scope is going to end up with a variation during construction. Overlapping scope is going to result in us double pricing and artificially inflating our price. Now, the way I like to do this, and once you start using it, it'll change your life forever, are battery limit drawings and scope interface summaries. For example, say we're on a building construction project and we have structural steel and some sort of facade or cladding. We simply mark up on a drawing. Now, this was a crappy version I did, but you can make it way better by highlighting these items, writing notes. Basically, we mark up on the drawings exactly what each contractor is going to be doing, and we note it down into some sort of scope summary matrix. That is going to make your life so much easier. So you can write all this in a scope of works, or you can just mark it up on a set of drawings that everybody sees. Now, the next step, once we've worked out our overall subcontract packages and the overall procurement approach to the project, the next step, using this as a basis, is we then prepare high quality tender packages. Now, you don't want to do, as I said at the beginning, you don't want to do what your clients do to you and just create these mammoth tender packages full of every project document that's full of irrelevant information. I was working on a concrete subcontract bid, and our client sent us all their electrical lockout tagout process. Now, the reason they do this, I think, as a side note, I think is actually incredibly unfair, because the reason they're doing that is they're attaching every possible document. So if any issue comes up during construction, they can refer back to it and say, well, you had access to it and you should have redone. I think that's insanely unfair, but your clients probably do try to do it to you. So can't do much about that. I think you shouldn't do that to your subcontractors, because particularly when you're tendering the work, if you send them way too much information, all they're going to do is exclude a whole lot of stuff, qualify their price. They're not going to put the time and effort into analyzing it properly. You're going to end up with a whole lot of different exclusions from different subcontractors. So the best thing you can do is have high quality, condensed, easy to understand, concise scope of works, set of drawings, supporting information that spells out crystal clear exactly what you want them to price and what format you want to return it in. The litmus test I like to use when I'm preparing a scope of works or someone to quote something is it should have enough information in it. Is it that if you were the estimator, you could price it? So you need to take the perspective of the estimator looking at the documentation. Every question they're going to have, is that spelled out in your scope of works? Who's doing the excavation? Who's supplying the concrete, reinforcement, embedment items? Who's doing the penetrations? Are we doing testing, QA requirements? How many mobilizations are we doing? What's the schedule? Every single thing should be in there. The next thing you always want to do with your scopes of works and tender package, which is a risk management exercise, is you want back-to-back requirements. What that means is in your tender package, your head contractor requirements, you want to pass those down to your subcontractor wherever possible. For example, if your contract has a 24-month defect liability, you want to get a 24-month defect liability from your subcontractors. If you are responsible for a certain concrete testing specification, you want to make sure your subcontractor has access to that specification and they're pricing to do that sort of testing. Basically, anything you are responsible in relation to the package of works relevant to your subcontractor, you want them to also be responsible to it. That's referred to as back-to-back contracting and is an essential contract management and risk management exercise. The next step after this is you want to issue this to 3 to 5 qualified subcontractors. Now, I understand that sometimes people will have preferred subcontractors because they've got good relationships with them, and that obviously makes sense if you've done that. But again, most of the time we'll be operating in highly competitive markets, and if we do have cherry-picked preferred subcontractors, unless we're very confident they're pricing stuff fairly to us, all we're going to do is probably artificially increase our price and reduce the chances of us winning the work. So unfortunately, construction is a competitive environment. Your clients will get 3 quotes to check your price against, so you should also have numerous qualified subcontractors that you trust, that you're happy to work with. You should be getting 3 to 5 quotes for every single package. Now, the goal here isn't just to send it out to any 3 to 5 random subcontractors. It's 3 to 5 subcontractors that you would be very happy if they were able to do the work. They should have good quality records, safety records. They should have good relationships with you. They should have high quality project managers and project teams. Really, you want to find subcontractors that you would actually be happy to award the project to. And again, if you do have subcontractors that you have very good relationships with and you're confident that they're pricing stuff fairly to you, it doesn't necessarily make sense to get multiple quotes, but a lot of the time you probably will need to be getting multiple quotes to ensure people are pricing stuff fairly and you're leveraging market competition. Once you issue the quotes, basically you want to manage the tender effectively. You should call them almost immediately after you send the tender package to ask any questions, explain that you can have a meeting to discuss it with them, because basically the more information you give them, the better their price is going to be. I would also, in the email that I send them, make sure any specific project requirements are absolutely clear and spelled out to them. And all this is going to do is increase the chance that you get accurate quotes. Now, Once you do get your quotes back from them, every quote they give you is going to have different inclusions, exclusions, assumptions, clarifications. So what you need to do is you need to look at the quotes you get. You need to level the bids. What this is, it's the process of clarifying scope gaps. You can either go back to the subcontractor and ask them to update their price to include your requirement, or you can simply make allowances for it. The other thing you can do at this stage, which makes sense for large packages where you would potentially be able to self-perform it, is you can do a self-perform check. This is where you work out the price of hiring your own labor, plant, materials, and doing the work yourself. This is going to have two benefits. One, it's going to help you confirm that you're getting good value for money pricing from your subcontractors. The second one is it's going to also give you another option. If the savings are significant, you could potentially look at self-performing it. It's all about optimizing the methodology. So the goal of this step fundamentally is we're taking 3 to 5 inconsistent quotes and we want to transform them into an apples to apples comparison. So I'll give you a quick example of what this looks like. Again, me shamelessly promoting Operum, but here are 3 quotes for different civil contractors. We've got the pricing schedule that we issued to them at tender. Each of them has filled this out. And then we've got specific adjustments to their quote. For example, Melbourne excavations didn't include wet weather allowances, so we budgeted for that and then have adjusted and have a total leveled price for each subcontract, and then can look at which one of these we want to include in our estimate. And then once you understand the subcontractor quotes, the next step is relatively easy. You have to choose which one to include in your bid. Basically, what you shouldn't do is include the lowest price because that's the one with the most risk associated with it. It's the one the subcontractor is most likely to have underquoted something, but you can include the lowest price if you are very confident in how they put it together. Basically, this step is we're determining which of these quotes to include in our estimate, which one is going to reflect the true cost of doing the work. Then we have to determine any risk, contingencies, and scope gaps we need to budget for. Because again, the cost to us of the subcontractor doing this work is the quote they have given us, plus any uncertainty associated with it, the scope gaps, variations, or any missing items. For instance, for this quote, which was fabricating and installing structural steel, we had to make an allowance for consumables that they weren't including in their quote. That's just an example of a specific scope gap. You can use a different approach where you have common risk allowances across all packages for things like variations, coordination issues, escalation, default performance issues, rework and delays, missing quantities, head contract obligations not included in pricing items. These sorts of common risk allowances across subcontracts, I would typically include as a percentage allowance in my overall estimate. Where if you know there are specific gaps for specific packages, i.e. the missing consumables for the structural steel fabricate and install, you could include that directly in the structural steel package. Again, depends entirely on the project you're quoting, but it's just understanding what additional allowances you have to make on top of the quote to make sure you're going to have enough money to deliver the project. And that's pretty much it. We've gone from our original project scope, broken it down into packages, and then determined exactly what amount to include our estimate. Final thing I want to talk about is a strategy that big contractors, large general contracting firms do that I think is unbelievably smart. And it's basically they do their procurement for major items during the pre-construction tendering phase. What this means is basically they issue their packages, do all their procurement, they sign subcontracts that will be executed when their head contract's signed. So as soon as they get the go-ahead from their client, all their procurement's done and they have zero risk associated with the rates from the subcontractor because they've already locked those in during the tender phase. So for example, you see this a lot in solar farms with the big EPCs where they've got maybe 70 or 80% of the total project costs is materials. So for example, for a solar farm, they'll get quotes for the panels, the trackers, the inverters, all these items. They'll lock that in during the pre-contract phase. They'll basically sign a contract with their subcontractor to supply all the panels that will get executed when they execute the head contract. Then as soon as they sign the head contract, as soon as they get given the go-ahead to build the solar farm, they sign the purchase order to order the panels, and that price that is included in their tender is the exact same as what they used to buy the panel. So there's zero escalation risk, there's zero scope gap risk. Well, I actually shouldn't say that. There's not zero scope gap risk because they might not have done the procurement properly at tender, but basically the price that they've done their procurement at tender with is the same as what they're going to use in project execution. The other massive benefit I see to this, and that it kind of like surprises me more companies don't do it, but you're only doing your procurement once. Almost every project I've worked on, you do the procurement during the tender, they go and get quotes for everyone. Then 3 months later, after the project's executed, the project team does the exact same thing. Not only does this annoy all your subcontractors, but basically you're doing the exact same work twice. Now, I understand the specific reasons for this. Maybe the project team has different opinions to the tender team, or there's been design development and changes, but as much as possible, you shouldn't try to redo your procurement. You should only be doing your procurement once, and that should be during the tender phase. Okay, to quickly recap and go through this system. First step is we want to create our packages, build our work breakdown structure, identify all the scope interfaces, and create our battery limit drawings. Again, battery limit drawings are life-changing. Then once we have our clearly defined tender packages, once we have our clearly defined project scope work breakdown structure, we then prepare our clean, clear, accurate tender packages. We issue them to 3 to 5 qualified subcontractors. We review the quotes, level them, adjust them, identify any gaps. We select the correct allowance to include in our bid. We then add realistic subcontract risk allowances and money for any gaps. And that is our procurement. That's how we get the correct subcontract value to include in our estimate. And for major scope items, we should be basically signing some sort of pre-tender agreement so our price is locked in.